Good evening, dear students. This video again is for MA second semester students on Wordsworth's The Prelude. Up to line number 140 I have explained, and I am going to extend that explanation further. Right? And let me tell you that it is an epic, and I told you that it was the philosophy, it was the method of Wordsworth to compose a poem after the experience has sunk beneath the uh, imagination for a long time, and he is going to make a choice. Selection and rejection will go on, and after that he will decide that he is going to write about himself. Before that, before deciding the subject matter of his poem, lots of idea hits his mind. He thinks about writing poem on some war situation, some glorious triumph, or song of victory, and so many other subject matter comes, some philosophical theme, religious theme, but finally he settles down with the uh, decision that he will write about himself. He will write about his own biography, autobiography. Okay, so the line number 150 going to start. When as becomes a man who would prepare for such an arduous work. The poet is of the opinion that the project that he is going to take is a very arduous, very difficult and very demanding kind of a work, enterprise. I through myself make rigorous inquisition. The report is often cheering. And he was trying to make a very rigorous, very meticulous selection of the subject, and the report was very cheering. He was getting very good ideas regarding writing poetry, and to lack the first great gift, for I neither seem to lack that first great gift, the vital soul. The poet says that he was having a very organic soul. Without having a great soul, poetry cannot be written. So that great soul, organic, imaginative faculty is there at his disposal, and the exterior beauty of nature is also abundantly present over there, and nor general truths, that is forms and features, give the vital soul, nor general truths which are themselves a sort of elements and agents under powers subordinate helpers of the living mind, nor I am naked of external things. So all the prerequisites which are demanded for writing poetry, great art, were available to me. Nor am I naked of external things, forms, images, nor numerous other aids of less regard, though one perhaps with toil and needful to build up a poet's praise, time, place and manners do I seek. What was demanded by me, what I was looking for was time, place and manner. Only these three things were demanded, and these are found in plenteous store. These things which he is having, actually the subject matters, the ideas were very much there in the mind of the poet earlier, existing in his mind. He was looking for a suitable time, and that suitable time was the time of seclusion, the time of isolation, so that he can complete the project, and this time is the most propitious time for him to continue to make the choice translated into action. Okay. So As many be signaled out with steady choice, no little band of yet remembered names whom I in perfect confidence might hope to summon back from lonesome banishment and make them dwellers in the hearts of men. Some themes were there which were unsung heroes. Some unsung stories were there in the mind of the poet, and he is very confident that he can write poem on those themes, and he can make those heroes immortal by his verse, whom I in perfect confidence might hope to summon back from lonesome banishment and make them dwellers in the hearts of men now living or to live in future years. So if he would write a poem on those unsung heroes, they would be popular and they would be remembered by the humanity in the coming time. But sometimes the ambitious power of choice, mistaking proud spring tide swelling for a regular sea, will settle on some British theme. Sometimes the idea strikes his mind that he should write on some indigenous British theme, some old romantic tale by Milton left unsung. Some of the stories which have not been taken up by Milton, he could write about that. More often turning to some gentle place within the groves of chivalry, I pipe to shepherd swains are seated harp in hand, amid reposing nights by a riverside of fountain, listen to the grave reports of dire enchantments faced and overcome by the strong mind and tales of warlike feats. He is also having the idea and sufficient amount of material to compose a poem on warlike themes. And then where spear encountered spear, about war exploit, like Homer and particularly Homer's epic, fought as if you always carry in your mind that this is an epic, and epic poem is very lengthy, 8 and 12 and 14 cantos are there, 14 books are there, and in an epic what happens, the extended details of the hero is shown from birth to the death, like Ramayana, Mahabharata, Paradise Lost. You will find from the very beginning of from the infant to the last moment of the hero, every detail is covered over there. And epic after tragedy is supposed to be the greatest poetry, greatest form of genre of poetry, and sometimes in our tradition epic is given greater significance as a genre of poetry than even tragedy, right? Aristotle regarded that tragedy is greater art, but earlier it was supposed that the epic form of poetry is the best kind of poetry, and the only selected few people are there, few poets are there who are capable of composing an epic, because it's a longer kind of a poem, and in order to write a longer poem you need to concentrate harder and for more for greater amount of time, the creative flash, the creative urge. That is why it is not in the capacity of every poet to write epic. Only the poets of exquisite genius or some extraordinary talent can compose an epic. Okay. Although many have tried, Shelley, Keats, Browning, many poets have tried, but the proper epic has been written only by Milton in English. This is also an epic, and this is considered as an epic, but not epic proper. Okay. So that the shield bore, so glorious was the strife whence inspiration for a song that wins through ever-changing scenes of votive quest, wrongs to redress, harmonious tribute paid to patient courage and unblemished truth, to firm devotion, zeal and unquenchable and Christian meekness hallowing faithful loves. And he is also capable of writing some love story, some poem based on the theme of love. And then he recounts so many subject matters one by one. That is not that important. He can write about Odin, the Roman Empire emperor, how the battle took place, all these things. And then he says that unnamed among the chronicles of kings, so many kings are there, great kings had been there in the tradition, in the British tradition, and he could compose a poem upon them, but he rejects it, suffered in silence of truth's sake, or tell how that one Frenchman through continued force of meditation on the inhuman deeds. I'm skipping a bit because these are the only the selection and rejection. All these subjects he is taking up, he is considering them and then rejecting that this is not going to be the perfect theme for his poetry writing, and he moves on. And lastly, he gets settled to write personal about his personal progress as a poet. And this was the first time when we are peeping into the composition of a poet, how the mind of the poet works. That is the greatest contribution of the romantic theories. They have tried to peep into the working of the poet's mind, what things go on to compose a poem, how the poem happens to take place. Before this, before romantics, this kind of idea was not given by any critic or any poet, that how poetry takes place. Okay. So he says that to my own passions and habitual thoughts, some variegated story in the main lofty, but the unsubstantial structure melts before the very sun that brightens it, mist into air dissolving. Then a wish, my last and favorite aspiration, mounts with yearning towards some philosophic song. He is also having the idea of composing a philosophical song of truth that cherishes our daily life. He wants to compose a song based on philosophical idea that is there to be found in the common man's heart, cherishes our daily life with meditations passionate from deep recesses in man's heart, immortal words, thoughtfully fitted to the Orphean lawyer. But from this awful burden I full soon take refuge and beguile myself with trust that mellower years will bring a riper mind and clearer insight. Then he says that I rejected this thing by thinking that in the advanced years, when he will become more mature and old, he would be in a better position, better mental capacity to compose a song like that, philosophic song like that, because he needs to have some more experience. Thus my days are passed in contradiction, with no skill to part, vague longing, happily bred by want of power. And slowly and gradually the time was passing on, and the poet is getting disturbed. Now his patience is, he is losing the patience. Till now he was having this confidence that he would be able to start his song, and then he is thinking on this, sometimes on this theme and sometimes on that theme. But now he is getting restless to decide it sooner or the later. From paramount impulse not be withstood, a timorous capacity from prudence, from circumspection, infinite delay. He understands that he has made a lot of delay by making the selection and rejection. This is now enough. Humility and modest awe themselves betray me. He is very humble and he is very modest, and that is why he is being betrayed by these two attributes, serving from a cloak to a more subtle selfishness that now locks every function up in blank reserve, now dupes me, trusting to an anxious eye that with intrusive restlessness beats off simplicity and self-presented truth. So now he is getting restless to start the poem anyhow on any subject, because it has become enough. Plenty of time he has spent by making the choice, selection and rejection, are better for than this to stray about voluptuously through fields and rural walks. And then he decides that it is better for him presently to move on in the field and enjoy the lusty grassy land that is lying over there, and ask no regard of the hours, resigned to vacant musing, unreproved neglect of all things. And he thinks that dropping all the idea of composing a song, it is better for him to keep on moving around and experiencing the beauty and lust, the glamorous scenes and sights. Far better never to have heard the name of zeal and just ambition. And then he thinks that it was better had he not been ambitious to write a great poem. Actually, ambition is something very positive. Sometimes it gives us troubles also. So he is getting troubled by his ambition, because he is not in a mood to write an ordinary song. He is in a mood to write a great song, and that is why he is finding it more difficult. The greater is the ambition, the more struggle needs. It needs to make more attempts are required to make to achieve it. So that is the case. Then he says, far better never to have heard the name of zeal and just ambition than to live baffled and plagued by a mind that every hour turns recreant to her task, takes her heart again, then feels immediately some hollow thought. As soon as he takes up a subject matter, he looks at the pros and cons, and some sort of hurdle, some sort of imperfection he notices, and he drops the idea. Then feels immediately some hollow thought, hang like an interdict upon her hopes. This, my lord, for either still I find some imperfection in the chosen theme, or see of absolute accomplishment, too much wanting in myself. So he was now to decide whether he is going to compose a poem that is having some sort of imperfection, although imperfection in the chosen theme. Whatever theme I will choose, if there is a bit of imperfection, it will do, and I will compose. He will compose a song on it. Or see of absolute accomplishment. It is the choice is his. Whether he has to make a choice. Whether his project may be having some sort of deformity, some sort of weakness, and he will reconcile, he will adjust with it, compromise with it, or he should compose a poem that is absolutely having no demerit, having no obvious faults, and it is perfectly okay. So that I recoil and droop and seek repose. So that kind of accomplishment, absolute accomplishment, a poem that is perfect from all corners, is still to come to his mind. Much wanting in myself, that I recoil and droop and seek repose in listlessness from vain perplexity, unprofitably travelling toward the grave like a false steward who hath much received and renders nothing back. So he feels that he is like that steward who has received so many things, so much of money, but he has not returned anything in exchange. Somewhere he is getting puzzled because of not being able to decide on what subject matter he should compose a song. He is now getting restless and he is getting discouraged a bit. And then he reaches, he addresses the river. The river, I told you, he was born in Lake District, Cockermouth. He and Sade, they belong to the same another poet, Sade, and he was brought up very close to the nature, river, dale, mountain. These were the things among which he grew up. So he goes there and he, in a way, by mind he goes there and he makes a kind of statement, he makes a kind of complaint to the river Derwent, nearby which it was the birthplace of the poet, and he says that was this all to go in vain, to be brought up in your company. I was brought up, I was in a way, I grew up along with this river, and he felt that his birth near this river, and his this river had been his playmate, so it might be having some sort of deep association and deep sort of it might be destined something. But now when he fails, he makes a kind of statement that it seems to him as if it was all in vain to grow up with this Derwent river. And then he remembers that when he was a child, how this the stream of the Derwent river used to flow from the side, and he used to listen the music in his infancy when he was in the arms of the nurses. The river used to flow from there, and the vibrant music that was created by the rolling water of the river was heard by him. So had it no meaning at all? So that kind of a statement is coming out, that one, the fairest of all rivers, loved to blend this murmurs with my nurse's song, and from his elder shades and rocky falls, and from his fords and shallows sent a voice that flowed along my dreams. I used to dream as an infant in the nurse's arms. The river used to send me messages which I used to dream when I was a child. For this, so why this happened? Did this happen only for this kind of achievement of Mr. Wordsworth, that I am not able to compose a good song? For this didst thou, O Derwent, he directly addresses the Derwent personification, winding among grassy holes where I was looking on, a babe in arms, makes ceaseless music that composed my thoughts. My thoughts were composed. My thoughts were, in a way we can say, when he was an imaginative child, he used to listen the music of the Derwent river, and that way his thoughts were composed by the music of that ceaseless music of that river, to more than infant's softness, giving me amid the fretful dwelling of mankind a foretaste, a dim earnest of the claim that nature breathes among the hills and groves. And as a child, he experienced he had the excess of the blessings of natural surrounding, like the river and all. So all these things had no meaning, and it was just for the sake of the music of the river was just for the sake of music. Had it not been the destiny of this poet to be famous by writing a great poem, that nature breathes among the hills and groves, and his attitude, this is all about the attitude. Many people are there whom you can say who are grew up along with the river and mountain and valleys, but they don't feel like. It's all about feeling, what kind of feeling you are having about something. So the poet, as I told you, that he is a nature mystic, and he gives a lot of credit to nature, that whatever he is because of nature. Nature is guide, nature is nurse, nature is friend and philosopher, everything. A great source of inspiration and glorious deed and so many things. So he expects too much from nature. That kind of association he is having. When he had left the mountains and received on his, in a way the poem starts from here. The real poem starts from here, as I told you that the description of the hero's childhood, from childhood to his death, is there to be found in an epic. So the poem is properly starting from the line number 270, right? So in the beginning, his childhood description is being given, infancy and then childhood, then his adventures in the nature, how he used to go to move along the hill and dale, and in the river he used to bath and all. So from here we can say the poem begins, and finally the poet decides that he is going to write about himself, his own experiences, how he came about to grow in the lap of nature. When the river leaves the mountains and received on his smooth breast the shadow of those towers that yet survive, a shattered monument of feudal sway. So some buildings are there, and those buildings are still surviving, and those buildings are the imprints of feudal powers, feudal system. The bright blue river passed along the margin of our terrace walk, and it used to pass very close to the house of Mr. Wordsworth, a tempting playmate whom we dearly loved. A tempting playmate, mind it. This is the language, how deep association the poet is having with the natural objects. He recalls it and he regards it to be a tempting playmate. Playmates are generally tempting, because you are having fascination to go with your friends and play. So this river used to tempt the poet when he was a child to play with it. Oh, many a time have I, a 5 years child, in a small mill race severed from a stream, made one long bathing of summer's day. When he was 5 years, only 5 years old child, he used to go for bathing in the river, and entire day he used to bath and bask in the sun, and after then again used to bath in the river. So that memory is there. Made one long bathing of a summer's day, basked in the sun and plunged and basking again alternate all a summer's day, or scored the sandy fields, or sometimes he used to walk on the sandy fields, leaping through flowery groves of yellow ragwood, or when rock and hill, the woods and distant skidaws, lofty height were bronzed with deepest radiance, stood alone beneath the sky as if I had been born of Indian plains. He says that as if he was born in Indian plains. This is a kind of derogatory statement. Indian plains, भारत के मैदानी इलाके में जैसे कि वो पैदा हुआ हो. And from my mother's hut had run abroad in wantonness. आवारागर्दी में अपने घर से, मदर के घर से भाग गया हो. To sport a naked savage. Sometimes he used to go in the lap of nature, in the objects of nature, in the forest, naked, in the thunder shower, and there used to be thundering shower also. So somewhere he was, as a child, he was very ambitious, he was very adventurous also. He used to play a lot. Fair seed time had my soul, and I grew up fostered alike by beauty and fear, much favored in my birthplace, and no less in that beloved vale to which ere long we were transplanted. So he and his friends, playmates, used to go and play a lot. There were we let loose for sports of wider range. Plenty of games and sports they used to play in the lap of nature. There were, ere I had told 10 birthdays, up to 10 years. When among the mountain slopes frost and the breath of frosty wind had snapped the last autumnal carcass, it was my joy with store of springs over my shoulder hung to range the open heights with where woodcocks ran among the smooth green turf. Alongside the river there was forest and grassy land, and he used to go there to enjoy nature. So from the very beginning he was brought up with the nature. Nature becomes a companion for him throughout his life, and that is why he has developed that kind of approach in which he finds that nature is having the solution and comfort of all sorts. Nature can give us best company. Nature is the best companion Nature is the great source of inspiration and a guide, a nurse, and it is very kind also. The last, sorry. Scudding away from snare to snare, I piled that anxious visitation. Moon and stars were shining over my head. Sometimes he used to walk in the night, and while walking in the night, he used to watch stars and moons over his head. Through half the night, scudding away from snare to snare, I piled that anxious visitation. Moon and stars were shining over my head. I was alone and seemed to be a trouble to the peace that dwelt among them. When he was walking in the forest, it appeared to him as if he was disturbing the serenity of the forest. Forest is having its own sacred tranquility, and while walking, he felt that somewhere he is troubling the nature, because he always believed that nature is a living being. Nature is not inanimate object for Wordsworth. He always regards it animate, living, and sometimes it befell in these night wandering that a strong desire overpowered my better reason, and the bird which was the captive of another's toil became my prey. Sometimes somebody else had hunted the bird, and he used to get it. And when the deed was done, I heard among the solitary hills low breathings coming after me. This is mystification of nature, right? Nature becomes living friend, and sometimes he used to feel that somebody is following him by silent footsteps and sounds of undistinguishable motion steps. Some undistinguishable motion he used to feel behind his back. Steps almost as silent as the turf they trod. Steps almost as silent as the turf they trod. It appeared as if the person who is following him is walking with a very silent step and following him. That is actually some mystical experience that he is recounting. Actually, no follower is there, but that is the spirit of nature. He feels that, right? He feels the spirit of nature. Nor less when spring had warmed the cultured vale, and when the springtime used to come, the entire valley was full of colorful flowers, and that way it was decorated, decked with ornament. Moved we as plunderers, where the mother bird had in high places built her lodge, and the birds used to have nest in the high places in the tree. Though mean our object and inglorious, yet the end was not ignoble. Although their wandering in the forest was just a kind of mischievous activity, but it was not ignoble at all. It was not ignoble. Why? Because he has learned so many things from his wanderings, out of his wanderings in the nature. Oh, when I have hung above the raven's nest by knots of grass and half-inch fissures in the slippery rock, but ill sustained and almost suspended by the blast that blew amean, shouldering the naked crag. Oh, at that time, while on the perilous ridge I hung alone, with what strange utterance did the loud dry wind blow through my ear? The sky seemed not a sky of earth, and with what motion moved the clouds. And all of a sudden he was there among the forest, and all of a sudden there was some sort of rash activity that he is recounting, and wind blew very fast. The sky seemed not a sky of earth, and with that motion moved the clouds. Lots of clouds came over there. So sometimes the ferocious form of nature he has been able to experience while moving, loitering in the forest. Dust as we are. Then some sort of philosophical content is there. Dust as we are, the immortal spirits grows like harmony in music. There is dark, inscrutable workmanship that reconciles discordant elements. This is something great, very, very significant to note, and this can be asked in examination also for explanation. A poet is here saying that we are made of dust and we will turn to dust. The final destination of man's body is what? To die, and to after that either to be engraved or to be burnt. And that way spirit grows like harmony in music. But our spirit keeps on growing. The spirit, the soul that we are having, keeps on making a leap, progress, just as harmony in music. There is dark, inscrutable workmanship that reconciles discordant element. Some sort of mystic power is there, some divine power is there that makes our spirit grow like harmony in music. So beautiful comparison is there. And dark, inscrutable workmanship. This workmanship is coming for God. The divinity shapes our ends to a great extent. So that reconciles discordant, and because of that divine element, divinity, all the discordant, heterogeneous things or the contradictory powers that we are having, they are reconciled. In poetry also it is said that poetry, imagination, makes the mutually contrasting things synthesized, uncommon with common, and commonplace with unique. All these things are dissipated, and there comes a harmony, and that kind of thing is there, and that is done by nature, that is done by God. Nature is towards with God or an element of divinity. So element of divinity very silently and very mystically, very secretly makes all these things happen, makes our spirit grow, and they cling together in one society. We are born to different families, having different temperament, different color, but we live in a society as a composite kind of a unit. Same way, inside we are having very contradictory attributes. On the one hand, you are very selfish. On the other hand, you are very large-hearted, cooperative. On the one hand, you are very ambitious. On the other hand, you are spiritual. On the one hand, you are immoral for certain things. Somewhere you become very dry, honest. So these contradictions are in a way synthesized naturally, and that happens because of divine interference. And this is divinity that shapes our nature and makes our personality. So in one society, how strange, and nature is also having that synthesizing power. Wordsworth always regarded that nature is having power of reconciliation and regeneration. Whenever there is some sort of disbalance, nature comes and makes the balance. Like Corona is making the balance, maybe. And how strange that all the terrors, pains and early miseries, regrets, vexations, lassitudes, these are the discordant elements which a man is in possession of. Terrors, pains, early miseries, regrets, vexations, lassitudes interfuse within my mind. All these things were there to be found in my mind in abundant measure, should ever have borne a part, and that a needful part in making up the calm. And these things are not for nothing. These things are also having their role to play. They are there with a purpose. The calm existence that is mine when I am worthy of myself, and making up the calm existence. This calm existence that I have had, I have achieved, has not come overnight. It has come passing from all these failures, all these imperfections, that is regrets, vexation, lassitude, and after that this attitude I am having today, and that a needful part in making up the calm existence that is mine when I am worthy of myself. So what I am today in making me what I am now, all these things have played a lot of part, and all these things have been discordant in nature, but they have been synthesized by that element of divinity. Praise to the end, thanks to the means which nature designed to employ. Nature, he doesn't say divinity, but he says nature. Nature and God, they are synonymous with Wordsworth, and he says that nature has brought these things here, whether her fairness visitings or those that come with soft alarm like heartless light opening the peaceful clouds, or she may use severer interventions, ministry, moral, more palpable as best might suit her end. And this nature does on its own terms. It decides how to make this kind of changes, and how to make the how to bring this faculty, how to make somebody's spirit grown in what measure. That is the decision of nature, and that is very secret kind of a working of nature. That is very mysterious and very beyond human comprehensive, beyond human comprehension, right? So this is 40 minutes. Okay, I'm stopping here, and I will be continuing in the next video, and that will be the last one. Okay, thank you, bye.